Hi, this is Paul. Wanted to make a little video before I did the traveling that I'm going to be doing next week. Partly to set up the traveling that I'm going to be doing next week. I'm going to the Multiply Conference 2025. What is the Multiply Conference? Join pastors, elders, and emerging church leaders from across the Christian Reformed Church as we shape a bold 10-year vision for church multiplication, leaders, networks, and movements. What if every class raised up leaders and planted churches? The Multiply Conference is our opportunity to dream, collaborate, and commit to a new era of multiplication. So some of you might remember Scott from Synod 2023. I made a video, CRC Synod 2023, Reverend Vanderploeg goes to Synod and how God loves his little flock. That was only a 27-minute video, but then I saw that, there's another video where Scott talks about this. Well, I guess it is longer than that.
Coming back to the word, and I think
because
if we are not,
Scott basically stewarded this motion through the floor, and what was important about it was, that's a lovely picture. What was important about it was Scott managed in 2023 to send an overture, and then followed up the overture by going to Synod and getting Synod to basically produce a motion about church multiplication and renewal, and nothing really came of it. And he managed to do the same thing in 2025. This is him describing it. I didn't hear anything about this, so I just stuck to it.
Yeah. And he just chronicled what happened there, because it probably in the history of Synod was a bit unusual to have someone do what I did and succeed.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Linked in the description.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult to go to Synod and create a floor motion and rally everyone to that floor motion and actually succeed.
Okay.
So that's what wound up happening. And if someone wants to go watch it, I think it's probably like an hour and a half, 2 hours long. But at least for me, I found the video like very well done.
He tells it in a gripping way.
Yeah,
he's very good.
He's good. He's good. So, shout out to Paul, who, probably what ended up happening is that his video made this moment at Synod more legendary than it otherwise would have been. Like, in other words, the moment stuck around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably became a turning point for our whole denomination, because, first of all, what happened on the floor of Synod, which I was a part of, giving these speeches and finally swaying the whole body and to come around and, but even more, his telling of what happened probably became
really
more legendary after the fact. So it
definitely helped you.
I think it had at least some small momentum that kind of gained some steam. But we still, the major issue that year was human sexuality, and the Synod actually kind of ended in a chaotic way. And so this issue of human sexuality stayed on until at least 2024, and even in some small part this year, 2025. I didn't go to Synod in 2024, but what happened this year is, and this is all related to everything. Go back and read my original overture from 2017. I basically was like, man, every budget's going to shrink. Everything that we're doing is going to, be affected if we don't pay attention to this decline.
Yeah.
And what's happened over the course of time is that the budget of our missions agency has kept on shrinking as our denomination has shrunk, to the point where they're having some pretty severe budgetary issues.
Well, we have the clip here, actually. Jake,
of what?
Well, I have it here titled as Scott's Bad News.
Oh, well, hold on. Don't do that one quite yet.
Okay.
Because we can do that in a second. Let me just explain it this way. So the decline has finally taken its effect. And what wound up happening is that Resonate, our mission agency, earlier in the year had to make, I think, what was for them a very painful announcement, that the budgetary issues had become so severe that from here on out, they were no longer going to be able to provide any funding for church planting.
Yeah.
And that got presented to our classis this spring, that there would no longer be any funding denominationally for church planting. And it really struck our classis as, oh man, this is the wrong move. Keep in mind our classis history.
Mm-hmm.
Like, man, we got to come up with a plan to reverse this trend line of decline.
Right.
I can tell you something that's not part of the plan.
Right.
Let's stop funding church planting.
Right.
So it really struck us. And so we wrote an overture basically asking that the General Secretary and Resonate would work to reprioritize church planting in our denominational budget. But again, when that went to the advisory committee, this time Felix was the one appointed from our classes. Hey, you go talk to the advisory committee. He went and he laid it all out. But when the recommendations came through the advisory committee, I mean, we should probably have them here word for word so that we know exactly. And maybe if someone you got the clips, maybe it's there.
Yeah.
But the first motion was something like, thank Class of Southeast for their zeal for church planting.
Yeah.
And so that's when I stood up and gave this first speech.
Okay, yeah, let's clear that. Let's play this clip here.
Sky Vaderploeg, Class of Southeast. I'm standing to speak in favor of recommendation number 1. Tongue in cheek, first of all, I always love it when Synod commends our classes. Thank you very much. But maybe more importantly, I want to just speak in favor of supporting Resonate. I think because of the decrease in funding, they're struggling to figure out how to make budget adjustments that's going to work toward church planting. And I know they're working as hard as possible to make churches and church plants flourish. So I just want to make sure that we understand, the director just spoke about how hard the last 6 months have been for them. And I think it's important for us to really hear that. So I'm speaking in favor. I have a little bit of a concern. And my concern is that with regard to this overture, we're going to say some great words together.
So I'll put the link to this video below, and I'm sure Scott runs through this. And basically what happened was Scott called me. Let's see what he said. So I'll put the link to this below. When I was at Midwestuary, Scott called me, and well, actually he called me a little bit before. But while I was at Midwestuary, I knew I'd have a little bit of time in my hotel room to make some phone calls. Basically, the idea was to see if we could get as many classes as possible to send on their own dimes delegates to this conference. Now, this is kind of a big deal in the context of everything else that's going on. The Christian Reformed Church has had a long history of, it loves the word covenant. And these Dutch immigrants that came to the United States and Canada very much covenanted together and did things collectively. And that included the way that things tended to be funded. Christian Reformed churches would give an unusual amount to the central organization in Grand Rapids to fund things. The Christian Reformed Church had, for denomination its size, an extraordinary amount of cooperative and centralized ministry. And in many ways, that's all breaking down as, and you can throw a lot of things at that question, as an immigrant ethos, as basically Americanization has taken hold, and Americans tend to collaborate in different ways. So I'll be talking about estuary at this conference. I'll be participating in a panel. I'm going with a delegation from my own classes, and I don't quite know what to expect from this. I might make some videos while I'm there with some of my friends to see what comes of this, and I'll probably make some videos talking about this, because this is a new effort. Part of this is that the denomination itself, when I say the denomination, I mean this centralized binational agency, as Scott just said, is really struggling in terms of its capacity to raise money. There are other issues as well. We heard some of these things at classes. The percentage of churches that are supporting the bulk of the denominational ministries, centralized ministries, is a small group, and more churches in the denomination are less than 100. And historically, it had been churches of 300, 500, 800, 1,000. Much of those, and those churches often only had 1 or 2 staff people historically, a lot of their funding would go to Grand Rapids and go to missions in North America, missions overseas, radio missions, and just a whole bunch of things like that. And all of those types of ministries in very many ways are being disrupted, are changing, or are just sort of getting smaller and going away. And so in many ways, this is a story about how churches use institutions differently. Now, recently, another big item came across that the Trinity Christian College, which is I can read a little bit of its history. Trinity Christian College was founded in 1959 by a group of they were Dutch too, Chicago area businessmen and young business leaders. The original mission, the founders sought to establish a college in Illinois that offered Christian higher education in the Reformed tradition. The first board of trustees purchased the Navajo Hills Golf Course in Palos Heights, and it became their campus site. The college eventually granted 4-year degrees. That was in 1971. You can just see those years of tremendous growth in the Christian Reformed Church. Diversity, while initially drawing heavily from the Dutch Reformed background, the student body grew and shifted towards greater ethnic, racial, and sectarian diversity. I was on the executive director search team when we hired Timmermans, and he had been president of that college. And the college really had a wonderful track record of, it started out as sort of a CRC thing, as an alternative to, say, Calvin or Dort, a smaller college. In that way, it's got some similarity, let's say, to Redeemer in Canada. But of course, Redeemer in Canada, Redeemer University, where we had Synod last summer, was partially started because that way Canadians wouldn't have to deal with the border in terms of participating in Christian education. And I think Redeemer also, I was very impressed by Redeemer when I visited there this summer. They've taken a different tack on a bunch of things. They've sort of really honed kind of the small college way of going about things. The living, they don't eat together in a dining hall. They basically have little households that the students live in. In some ways, I believe, I shouldn't think ahead of where I talk. So Calvin College, the original campus on Franklin Street that my parents went to in the 1950s, they had some dorms, and then they had things that they called the coops. I think they were the chicken coops, so my mother lived in a coop. I believe they still ate in dining halls, but they used houses for dormitories, and so those coops were sort of famous. When they moved to the Knollcrest campus in the late 50s, early 60s, and really started building that campus then as the 60s went on, then you had basically standard type dorms, standard type dining halls, and the shape of Calvin University as it is today. But Trinity was sort of a special school in that they really made efforts to reach out in the Chicago area to minority groups. Part of this drew on some of the painful history of race in the Christian Reformed Church that surrounded in the 60s Trinity Christian School and questions of racial segregation and white flight. My father was involved in that. They eventually led to the Synodical Committee on Race Relations. That, all of that history happened in the 60s and 70s. And so part of what, again, happened in Chicago around Trinity is that it really became a wonderful example. I heard a lot of these stories when I was on the executive director search team because Steve Timmermans was the one being interviewed, and we went over their resumes quite a bit. And we had heard a lot of stories about really the wonderful things that were going on at Trinity Christian College. So the news that this current year, which that's a fast closure, this current year will be their last academic year. November 4, 2025, Trinity Christian College announced its decision to close at the end of 2025-2026 academic year due to financial challenges, including declining enrollment, post-COVID financial losses. The final commencement is scheduled for May 2026. Despite its planned closure, the college's legacy of providing Christian scholarship for over 66 years, preparing students for various fields, and deep connections to the Chicagoland community remains a significant part of its history. So it's a very sad announcement, but again, it's then, of course, there's discussion of that on CRC Voices, and there's discussion of that in the broader culture. There are a lot of smaller colleges, smaller private colleges that historically had ties to denominations. A lot of those colleges are going to be closing, just like a lot of churches are going to be closing. There's going to be a tremendous shifting of institutions around Christian communities in North America, and it's probably going to be fairly disruptive. Another thing that I saw, well, let's listen a little bit. What's Paul talking about?
From before I even showed up in Calgary, there was a question that was going to drive the campus ministry from the very beginning, and it was this question: do you love me? Do you love me? That's the beginning question. Okay, now I got to quick tell you my street cred because Melanie, Dr. Humphreys, shared us hers. So she told you first some things about her that maybe make you feel disconnected from her because she didn't grow up CRC so much. So I'm going to do the same. I'm actually from the United States of America. I immigrated here. I finally became a citizen 2.5 years ago, but it is a strange little thing, right? Now, the other side of the story is that I am so embedded in this Christian Reformed community. My dad is a Christian Reformed pastor, so I moved around in 6 different spaces while I was growing up. I went to the Christian schools. I went to Dordt University. I went to Calvin Theological Seminary. I even got at least 12 badges in cadets, right? This is how embedded I am in us, right? And then guess who I married? I married a pastor's daughter from Canada who also traveled to 6 about spaces in the West and the Midwest, and who also didn't go to cadets, but the Calvinettes is what it was probably called back then. Now it's GEMS. I say that because to some degree, I feel like my story is a little bit of our story because I'm so embedded within us. And yet at the same time, I don't think I could ever have gotten to the story I'm going to tell you today without moving to Canada. And that's because in campus ministry, worlds are different, just a little different. We love each other, we care for each other.
Now, part of what's true is that campus ministry was quite a bit larger in Canada than it was in the United States. And Paul, as he just said, is the son of a Christian Reformed minister. He married a girl who was the daughter of a Christian Reformed minister. He's very Christian Reformed. But this is on a video from the Towards Canada, towards CRC Canada movement. So there's a group in Canada that wants to see the creation of an alternative Christian Reformed church in Canada. And part of this, there's a lot of discussion about this on CRC Voices. Many believe, including myself, that a big part of the motivation of this was the Christian Reformed Church's decision to maintain a traditional posture on human sexuality and to enforce it via confessionalism. And Paul was a critic of that decision as a campus minister. He's done it on CRC Voices. And so in the United States, there's a Better Together movement and there's a Towards CRC Canada movement. You just see sort of this fragmentation. Now, the numbers seem to be quite small. I'm a little bit curious about where he's going with this now.
Okay. So I took my backpack, and the University of Calgary had just renovated a brand new space, actually, for the multi-faith chaplains when I showed up in August 2004. And so there was no furniture yet. And then nobody else was there. No other chaplains were there because the chaplains don't always show up in August, but I didn't know that. So I went to the office with my own table and
Okay, so if you're interested in the video, I'll have the link to this video below. Chong, the former editor of the Banner, has, I think he had a talk on this. So in other words, Chong was from Toronto. In other words, there's sort of this movement to say, well, it's time for certain CRCs in Canada to come together and form their own denomination. I think to the degree, my impression is that many of the people participating in this are already in the process or are planning on disaffiliating with the Christian Reformed Church. Again, at this point, it's not clear exactly how many churches are going to leave the CRC. Right now, a lot of the estimates are like 40 to 60, which out of a denomination of 900 some churches is a pretty small number. It's a quite a bit smaller number than the exodus that happened in the 1990s over the fight over women in church office. So, but again, we see this other movement of fracturing, of the institutions are not doing what they used to, and now you see grassroots efforts to try to pick up what the institutions are struggling with, or maybe have a new organization. And so it's going to be very interesting. At the same time, I was reading on Voices that the Alliance of Reformed Churches, that is made up of a lot of Reformed Church in America congregations that left the Reformed Church in America because they were unwilling to enforce the traditional position on human sexuality. And I think in some ways that's sort of akin to what's happened in the Anglican Church. A lot of them, because they could leave that denomination with their buildings, if they went to another denomination, some people set up sort of a quick denomination, the Alliance of Reformed Churches, and a lot of Reformed Church of America churches jumped to them. They are now basically have an ecclesiastical fellowship relationship with the Christian Reformed Church. They didn't have that before, but a lot of these institutions are just sort of all over the place now.
These different organizations, we set them up in parallel, right? In parallel to some of the other organizations, because we wanted ours to be shaped and rooted in faith. Again, all good stuff. But here's the question. If this kid, 29 years old, sitting in this office after 3 years, has to go back to the United States, and the door closes on the CRC chaplain's office forever, who's sad about that? I mean, the students are. The 15 students I've fed hundreds of meals to over the last 3 years. And maybe the CRC community is like, oh, shucks. But the university might not even notice that I left. How about for us in our churches? If our churches had to close their door, who would be sad about that? Us? Yes. Pastor might not get paid. Oh, yikes, right? Would the neighborhood mourn our parting or not? It's a question for you. I don't know your churches. It's just a question that we ask in campus ministry. A question about that might make us evaluate our relationship to our neighbors. Do we love our neighbors? I mean, we know that.
I don't quite know where he's going with this, because, of course, if there's no money for church planting, there's probably not going to be any money for campus ministry. And if church planting, the goal is, let's say you put funding in for 2, 3, 4 years, and the goal after that is that the church will be self-sufficient and growing on its own after that. Campus ministry is a different kind of ministry in that it's usually perpetually dependent. And if you are paying one campus minister, I don't know what Canadian salaries are like. If one campus minister is costing you somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000 a year, and they're ministering to 15 students, at some point a bean counter is probably going to look at that and say, is this a sustainable ministry? And whereas how many churches are there in Canada? Maybe 300 to 400. Is that high? And if the 14 or 15, and again, all these numbers could be wrong, but they're just for illustrative sake. If the 14 or 15 campus ministers are supported by, I mean, not several dozen, maybe several hundred churches. At this point, again, I don't know, because I just basically am reading on CRC Voices how many churches can Towards Canada actually attract to itself. All right, I found it. It was Tuesday evening, about 6:25. big discussion. Here's Rob Torrenstra talking about it.
What's happening on the American?
So they're voting. And the motion was to not accede to Overture 28. Overture 28 dealt with this matter. And
Yes, 100. Oh.
And so the Synod, after a long discussion, voted to not accede to the motion. The overture was to envision two distinct Christian Reformed churches, and it was 171-3. So now, obviously, there are more people that didn't go to Synod, but let's see what they're up to now.
To become friend Willis, Bill Van Groningen. Like, this is where I was going to try to put in a "what you talking about, Willis" thing video, but I don't know how to do that stuff. Anyway, so Willis Van Groningen, Bill Van Groningen wrote the kind of, maybe Wilma will like this. He wrestled through almost like a confessional document for how we are going to try to embody campus ministry at the University of Calgary, and it was called "Do You Love Me?" Where do you think I get all my good ideas? Somebody else every time.
All right. So again, all of these institutions are changing. And I tend to suspect that, well, we'll see what happens in Florida. In some ways, I don't expect that there's no big thing that's going to happen in Florida. What's going to happen is that people are going to get ideas, and then they're going to go back to their classes, and then we'll see what happens in the individual classes. The goal isn't to remake a denomination. There will be all of the denominational people down in Florida many of the denominational people will be in Florida. The key leaders will be in Florida watching this because they want churches to multiply. They want to be helpful. They want to participate. But all of these institutions are changing, and they're going to continue to change. And it will be interesting to see how much dislocation there is, how many of these efforts will be too small to actually be viable. And as what usually happens, new things will emerge, and we'll see. So I think this is a kind of crappy video, but yeah, I just at least wanted to set up a little bit of what I'm going to Florida to do, because I'll probably be making some videos from Florida about this, about CRC stuff. So the links to everything I have are below, and probably those links are more important, so you can go and watch some of these videos and dig deeper and figure out what's going on.